Are you ready? Everybody give me just a minute. We want to make sure that this is on before we get started. We're a little bit behind, but it's important that this is on. We're good? Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order, our regular meeting for Tuesday, May 21st. It is 6:03 p.m. We can do a roll call, please.
Shannon Glazer. Here. Patty Tyler. Here. Vice Chair Michael Davenport. Chair Lisa Manifold.
Here.
Thank you.
And at 3, we do have a quorum. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from April 16th, 2024.
Second.
Well, I'm actually entertaining a motion. Not making one.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes. I will second it from April 16th, 2024.
Is there any discussion? Anything that we read needs to be changed? Okay, all in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Are there any public comments that are not related to the COA for 1711 Minor Street?
Do you have anybody on that?
No one online. I didn't see anyone signed up.
Nobody has signed up. None.
Okay, then is there any conflict of interest tonight that we need to be aware of? Hearing none, we will move along to our new business. And this is the certificate of appropriateness for 1711 Minor Street exterior renovations. It's a re-review. This is a public hearing before the Hprc of the City of Idaho Springs on a certificate of appropriateness COA for 1711 Minor Street, City Hall exterior renovations re-review. The commission will decide to either recommend approval or disapproval of both items during tonight's meeting. This is a formal public hearing. We will require testimony to be given under oath. We will not follow any formal rules of evidence. If there is a question about the admissibility of evidence or testimony, I will make a ruling on that as chair. The order of this hearing will be as follows: staff introduction and testimony, the applicant, any public testimony, applicant response period to a public comment if desired. After I close the public hearing, the commission will begin its deliberations and make our decision. We will do this by motion. The suggested motion is in the staff report. If we cannot reach a decision tonight, we could also continue the matter. Before we begin the public hearing, any questions about process from my commission? Is that pretty clear? Okay, just as a quick note, you do have the architectural plans in the packet in front of you. They're printed out. This hearing is now declared open at 6:06 p.m. Okay, let's start with staff testimony.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Dylan here, city planner. So as Lisa mentioned, this was previously reviewed back in November of 2021, but because our COAs expired, we wanted to re-review to make sure that we're still up to date as they, really start in earnest on the windows and all of the renovation work. There's 2 small amendments that since 2021, the first is for the window package, which is a pretty minor change to, while the approved package contained 1/2-inch glass, they instead like to install 1/4 inch glass to allow reconstructed wood sashes to more closely mimic their original profile. And existing 6 double hung windows would also receive that same glass to match. There's also some stucco work that was always anticipated for the site, but was not included in the initial scope of work, which was shown in the original plans as future work not in contract. But we've decided we'd like to go ahead and do the work to improve the stucco on the base of the building. This was discussed at council on 13th. So those would be the 2 changes. As far as the original COA, those are the only 2 changes. So I've reviewed this first. Has anything changed? That would change the criteria for approval. The existing work that was in the original scope all appears to continue to meet all of the criteria. Nothing in our criteria or code has changed that would make it so that it's different. And so it appears that all of that proposed work continues to fit within the historic district and the historical character of the structure. The proposed changes also appear to be quite appropriate. Stucco will do a good job of better sort of finishing the building and making it look more complete. And the window work, the window amendment, staff believes fits with the criteria because it will make it look more closely aligned to original profile of those windows. So given all of that, I'm happy to go into any particular bits of the proposal, but I think at this point, I'll just leave it at that and mention that staff recommends approval of this with the proposed changes as is recommended in the staff report.
Thank you, Dylan. Our Chris and Tim, are you here as the applicants?
Yes, we
Okay.
are. Wants to come up?
Please do. Just making sure I have the right people in the right place.
Sure, you bet.
Okay.
I think Dylan did a good job describing what we are planning on doing. You know, stucco, as he said, was originally in the scope of work for this project. It was a recommendation that we had made. And when this project was reviewed with the city to bid, we decided to exclude that work just because there were concerns with the budget. But now that we're underway, and we have a contractor on site, a very competent contractor working on the masonry, and a good general contractor, it was decided to move forward with the stucco. It'll really improve the appearance of the building. Just as a little bit of history, this building was moved from the former the existing Safeway site, and it was put on a cast in place concrete foundation. So in order to cover up the transition between the existing brick schoolhouse and the foundation below, some stucco parging was put over that transition area. And so if you go outside, you can see that there's a lot of exposed concrete that was never stuccoed. So we would we would recommend that those walls be stuccoed to be consistent. So that's the stucco part. And then the windows, we've worked a lot with Spectrum General Contractors. They have their own window shop. When they were under contract with us, they had recommended that we go to 1/4-inch laminated glass because we can really improve the profile of the window, making it look more historic. We are familiar with this. We did it at the Black American West Museum, the Justina Ford House, with Spectrum. And anyway, they do a beautiful job with windows. So
Are they still as efficient?
it's probably about the same, maybe a little bit
And I ask
less.
because I've been in this room in the summer and I know part of the replacement, even though it is historic, is making these windows more efficient for airflow in this room.
Yeah. And they're not gonna be super efficient, but there's not gonna be much difference between the 1/4-inch laminated and the 1/2-inch that's there now.
Okay.
But one comment on that, the windows will be operable,
Yeah,
and most of
There's a
them,
huge thing right there.
most of them are not operable, so they could be raised on a warm summer day with screens put in, the pull-out screens at the bottom. You could do that if you chose.
And that's what this is a picture of, like, that it's improving.
yeah, that.
Okay, that's this, you guys. Picture in the packet. Oh, right, okay.
This one. And then, yeah, this will allow the window work. There will be a stop on the inside of the window, so if there is any damage to the glass, those stops can be removed and the glass replaced.
All right, any questions of the applicants? Shannon? What you're considering?
It'd be really nice to be able to open them. But yeah, I was wondering about the efficiency too, like.
Well, it's not really, that's not really our scope, but I just know from,
Yeah.
like, if we're gonna make a change, I really wanna make sure that they work. You
It
know,
will be operable.
yes, Michael, since you came in a little bit, as we had started, any questions for Chris and Tim?
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
The other thing I might
Oh.
mention is that you can see the project is ongoing and most of the masonry work has been completed. And now the project is transitioning into the window work and painting around the eaves and,
I saw that the tuck pointing had been, most of the tuck pointing had been done.
and then the stucco work, originally they said maybe not until the fall, but it's possible it may start sooner than that.
Oh, that's
So you'll
new.
continue to see, it's gonna take time with all the windows, because as Chris mentioned, they take them out down to their shop in Denver and then bring them back, so they're just doing them several at a time.
Okay,
So this project will probably go through the summer.
Yeah, it will.
Fall, yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
We appreciate it. And just before you go, any other questions? Okay, then, Wanda or Dylan, anyone who has comment about this particular, anybody signed up, anybody online? Nobody signed up.
Yep, no one had signed up, no one is online, so.
Okay, then I am going to close the hearing at 6:14 PM. Now it is time for discussion with my commission. Discussion, questions, concerns do we have?
I didn't have any issues.
Okay. I didn't see any with it either when I read through this.
No, it's been a long time coming, so it's good.
And I like the continuation of the stucco instead of that weird line. I was like, pulled over from popping this thing down.
When we discussed it in council, I went out and looked at it, and I think he's gonna make it look a lot better. Okay, then do I have a motion concerning the application for COA for 1711 Minor Street, City Hall exterior renovations? I would entertain one.
Make a motion that we approve the COA as stated
For 1711.
for 1711 Minor Street.
I'll
Do I
second
have a second?
Yes.
All in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? All right, that is done. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I hope we can get the stucco.
Yeah, we're excited.
Will be nice, it'll be nice, because then we move to interior, correct?
That's right.
Interior is also very exciting.
Yeah, we're moving forward to the, you know, it will be.
Okay. That puts us to, anything else that we need to know from staff?
I hope you have a wonderful rest of your meeting. I will be leaving, so it was great to see you all.
All right, so then I will adjourn the meeting at 6:16 PM. However, none of my commission go anywhere because we have a work session right after this.
Don't we have another
Oh,
application?
We have a pre-application. We went from a regular meeting to our work session.
Yeah, that'll just be a work session.
Yeah, we're just a work sessioning right now. Does anyone need a comfort break or anything like that?
Okay.
Okay, as long as we're all good. All right,
Hazel's okay, we're good.
then let's go into our work session. We have a pre-application meeting for a potential distillery at 1743 Minor Street, which is right over here. Staff, if you'd like to get started, we all have some of the preliminary plans in the packet.
Sure, of course. So this was prepared as a preliminary review opportunity, just to get, as is kind of encouraged per the design guidelines for historic structures. And so at this point, there's no formal application, but what the developer, I guess, who's here and will do the brunt of this presentation, this is an opportunity to consider any concerns with guidelines with the historic district and compatibility and the like to try to guide potential submittal later on and avoid any potential headaches later would be the hope. So with that, I prepared a brief memo just to talk about a few of the key things. One thing to note that would be separate from your review, but this building is proposed to be far taller than what is permitted in the historic district zoning or historic downtown zoning district, which has a maximum height of 35 feet. And so with that, a variance would be required through the variance board. That would be a separate approval. And then in addition to a COA, which would be required for the demolition as well as for construction of a new building, because the proposal is to remove the existing building that our guidelines I actually wrote, or I noticed after as I was going through these guidelines, kind of looking at them for updates to the guidelines, that the property 1743 Minor Street is specifically designated as non-contributing for Appendix C. So anyway, that, part of this would be the request potentially to demolish the building and build something. And then if, they were to get through both of those stages, the final stage before building permits would be a final development plan, which would get reviewed by planning commission and council. And I think that's all I really have to say at this time about it. I think I'll let the applicants come on up if you'll have them. And
Well, since this is a work session, it's a little less formal. What I'd like to do is invite the applicants to come up and introduce yourselves, and then after they're done, if we have any more questions for you
yeah,
after them, that would be great. Dylan, if you want to put their plans,
oh, sure,
share
that's a
your
good idea.
screen with the plans.
I'm Devin. I'm with both Blue Sky Whiskey and Booze Works. My background is I built distilleries, and we've done 100, 120 of them all around the world, and we're really excited to try to come in and build one locally. We both live up in Evergreen, and I guess you guys have printouts, so I didn't need to bring the big one. But if you'd like to see the big one, I've got that all this package in full size as well.
And my name's Nick Melzer. I'm a local realtor here with Compass, whiskey lover and recovering attorney.
And I've pulled it up on the screen. I know it's maybe even easier to just see in the plans here, but in case anyone wants to watch later or it's online.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And honestly, the narrative is probably more important, I think, for this group than my drawings. I will say I am not an architect and I don't play one. So everything is very ugly, and it will get much prettier when actual professionals are involved. I'm just trying to bash together something that is a reasonable approximation of what we'd like to do here. And we're happy to make changes and adjustments as you guys would like to try to get this through. We're very excited about trying to be in Idaho Springs.
And just for context, real quick, we do not own the real estate here. It is currently for sale. We are considering it, but
You know that was a question.
but it is not a viable option for us unless we have some sense that we can do what we're actually interested in doing. And if this isn't necessarily the right spot, we're certainly open to considering other locations within Idaho Springs, whether in the historic core or not. So I would say, we can think about this in this specific location, and the plans reflect that, and I think that is a good location for what we're trying to do. But more broadly, I think we're looking for feedback from the committee as to what the tolerance is for the general concept of what we're trying to do somewhere in Idaho Springs in the historic district.
I think this is the best location, but that's just my uninformed opinion.
That would be beyond our scope. Outside of
We
our
met with the
lane.
city separately on this, but I think this is the right location, so we'd like to go a little farther and talk to you guys about this.
Well, before we get any further, I will say I appreciate that you come talk to us. I think that Dylan is right when you're doing this kind of thing. It really helps that you come and talk to HPRC beforehand, so that when we get to the point where we're looking at a COA, if that is what happens, it makes it much easier for all parties involved because we've hammered out whatever the concerns are. Did everyone get a chance to look over the plans? Is there anything else you want to tell us before we move into questions?
I think the narrative really spells it out. In my mind, there's the one big question, and besides that, it should be about the easiest decision you guys made in the last couple of years, because we want to be what you're
None of
looking
these
to
are
be.
easy. Well, that's not true. The city hall one was pretty easy, but that was because it was a continuation. I have a question. Does the Rick House have to be as tall as you have it?
It depends on how you define have to. So what we've selected is a traditional height. The 9 levels of barrels is what is considered standard, particularly for a late 1800s style rick house. So it's stylistically correct for what we want to do. We are going to be the only distillery in the state of Colorado that has built one of these. And so if you are of the opinion that the current whiskey being made in Colorado is good enough, then no, that is not a requirement because we can do what everybody else is doing. We don't necessarily agree with that opinion and believe that the benefits of the height to the quality of the whiskey is substantial.
That's why I was asking, because when you look at what you initially submitted, it states that this is based on, how to chemically make this, a better, so that's why I'm asking. I wanted to have some clarification. I have more, but anybody else? No, I don't like this.
Well, so if you go to Kentucky, you go to Bourbon Country, all of the distilleries that you've heard of there, for the most part, are aging their whiskey in a large traditional rick house, which is of this particular height, in part because of the Devin can tell you more about the actual chemical effects and whatnot here. That the relative humidity at different levels of the rick house is very different and causes the whiskey to age very differently at different levels of the house. So the whiskey that's aged at the very top of the rick house is going to be significantly different from the whiskey that's aged at the bottom.
And basically, the greater the height, the more significant the difference.
The reason I ask is that I actually don't have a huge problem with this. This reminds me of architecture that I see in turn of the century Baltimore, downtown Baltimore, Fells Point, a lot of that industrial that has been repurposed. Not sure that that is entirely what needs to happen here, but that's what this makes me think of when you see this architecture. It's a non-conforming building, so from that standpoint, if you wanted to demolish it, I don't see a huge problem with that. My problem, quite frankly, is 50 feet. We have a 35-foot height in the historic district, and having seen some of our 35-foot height things, I don't like them that close to the historic district. I think it detracts from it. And this is actually not going to be only 50 feet. It's going to be taller because you have a rooftop deck. So that puts your height on this piece closer to 60, if we're going to be realistic about what's on top of the rooftop deck.
Well, so we will be limited to what can be on the rooftop deck. Building code will only allow non-attached objects. So there's a railing 42 inches. It's obviously going to be see-through. Beyond that, it's tables and chairs and a bar in the center that will be completely invisible. The only exception may be the elevator, which we're required to have. And at least the current plan is glass. So again, that it isn't, from our point of view, we want the panoramic view on the top of the barrel house. So it should be, or should look like from all observed angles, to hold to that 64.5 feet tall. It really shouldn't look like it's 7.
But that's a lot taller than our 35-foot limit.
It certainly is.
And that is my concern. Like, you could go to the variance board. You never know what the variance board is going to do because it's not any of us.
Right.
But I do not like going over there's a reason why we have the 35 feet. And I like that at 35 feet, because if you look at our buildings, with one exception, we pretty much have 35 feet or less. So that would be my sticking point. If you're asking for feedback, I actually don't mind this. I think the idea of having, a distillery that is unique and could provide employment and business here would be great. But from an architectural and what our commission is concerned with, it's the 35 feet. That's the sticking point for me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that I agree with the point you made that the use could be something very good to occur, but probably not in the historic district for the reason you mentioned. There's 3 specific guidelines that deal with design guidelines that deal with height, and all 3 of them talk about being consistent with one of the buildings that are already here in the historic district. So it'd be very tough to say that something that tall meets the guidelines.
Well, it doesn't, and there's a picture. It's not in this packet. It's in it's in the packet that we got, that gives you a line of sight, it's this one.
Is it the one that I have up there?
No, it's the
The
actual.
side view from 17.
Oh, that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, this one right here.
Yeah.
That doesn't like, no matter how industrial, that doesn't fit with what we have down here. You know, so that would be my concern, it doesn't fit. And that is still in the historic
It
district.
certainly is. And I believe that is the biggest issue. I can't imagine the rest of the building in any way doesn't conform, because it's certainly our intention to make it conform.
Well, I think because it's a non-conforming building, I think you can make it architecturally look similar, but that is, like, that's, there's nothing getting around that, like 35 feet to 50 or 65, 64 and a half, that's a huge difference.
Well, the two mitigating factors we feel like we have here, one, it's going to be up against the highway, right? So it's replacing the view of the side of the highway in some way, depending on which angle you
But we
look at
still
it.
have this view right here.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's with respect to the historical review committee, it is at the very edge of the historic district, where it on the next lot over, it would simply be a variance issue and not
But it is
one
an
for the
historic
historic,
district.
right? But I'm just, those are the two, what we call mitigating factors with respect to the height for the historic review committee.
And the taller part of the building is partially visible from Minor Street through the parking lot. So in other words, that I would appreciate you doing the sightline drawing, but if you were just to move that down, that front building is no longer there, and you're seeing you got a direct view of the tall part of the building.
At least as of today, when we talked with the city a couple of weeks ago, they were mentioning about moving the train over and possibly building some kind of pavilion in where the parking lot is now. And so that would be removed. And currently with these trees, most of that view through the parking lot is also obscured, similar to the park. I chose the one that you can see the building the best. If you move that Google Street View one back, the trees basically obscure it. We weren't able to, I didn't feel it was an honest representation of the problem. So that's why we chose this.
But I think the second issue in terms of after the height would be the facade, the appearance of the walls. You know, we appreciate you provided us elevations to give us a sense of scale. And we understand you're not giving us polished drawings, and we're not expecting you to, because that's a lot of money on your part. So we don't want to ask people to do that before they get some basic questions answered. But there definitely would need to be, there are certain guidelines that sort of deal with breaking up the facade. And you know, whether it's Baltimore or lower downtown in Denver, you can find buildings this size and you can see historically how they were broken up.
And I will say there is a structural issue with the drawing, the way it's presented, in that to the right of the entryway door, it appears to be a solid brick wall for whatever
This
that
one
is.
right here.
Yes,
This
ma'am.
is the view from
Yeah,
Minor.
to the right. See, but basically, this section in here is actually the loading dock. And so it's reset, this section of wall is recessed back 50 feet from the street. And so it actually does not, it's non-continuous. So it stairs a small section of wall and then a 50-foot recess to look at a brick wall. And then we do have a brick wall here that's for the elevator shaft. So on the street level, it would be, I think, a challenge to put, I mean, we can put in a fake window like some of the buildings I was looking at downtown today. And the other option, and I mentioned it in the narrative, is removing this wall. Currently, the loading dock is sealed in because it's a loading dock. And I don't know that that's the visual appeal that we would want from a pedestrian level.
Not from Minor.
And so I think closing it in with the brick wall gives an appealing feel rather than I mean, it's silos, it's not the worst thing in the world, but still not the prettiest thing either.
You know, we could closing it would be better than not closing it.
And we're flexible with respect to appearance
Yeah.
generally. I mean, nothing here, this was our attempt to meet the guidelines for the sort of review committee.
Is there a reason why the windows on the left side are kind of different than the right? Is this something
No, I mean, I originally started drawing this off as a true Romanesque building with the arch tops. And
downtown, yeah.
then when I drew the second half of the building, it was easier for me to replicate rectangular windows. So I chose to do that because it saved me several hours of work.
And so the windows on the taller portion, do those represent actual floor levels or they're just breaking up the mass?
So floor
Because
level
it would be
is.
much taller than 60 feet if it were that many floors.
No, and yes, at the same time. So,
Because of head height.
well, so in a brick house, we have a walking platform every 8 feet. And that is because we can fit 3 barrels that are roughly 6 feet tall, with 6 inches of clearance between the barrels, and then about a 1 foot floor, above and below. So those windows are designed to be operable by a person walking along the rick house floor levels to open the windows 9 months a year to increase airflow. So
if it's 8 foot clear and then 1 foot for the floor, it looks like you've got 8 levels, so that would make it like 72 feet.
yes, the building's actually set down 10 feet into the ground. So
this is not great here.
this is great. This is the parking lot level today. We actually have, and it's shown on the drawings,
This is seven rows of.
this lowest level was actually down at creek level, 10 to 12 feet below the current parking lot.
Have you looked to see, have you talked to the owners or anything about whether or not you can actually do that? Because as you drill down closer to the creek, you know, you do tend to find water. I think I recently heard someone was like at 8 to 10 feet down, and they are a good 300 feet back from the creek and they're hitting water.
Yeah, I anticipate us hitting water. We should, based on county GIS, be right at winter level, water levels, but when we get the spring rise, we'll absolutely be under. So we'll be looking at doing flood doors all along the lower level and actually ground level as well, to prevent that water intrusion. And actually, I was just meeting with an engineering company today that specializes in water membranes for masonry construction, to prevent the water intrusion both during construction and afterward. So yes, it's a concern, but it's not enough of a concern for us to do more than, have plans to pay for mitigation.
This is sort of tangential to design guidelines, but have you sort of thought through how your truck movement or truck traffic would be handled? Would it all be handling by going east from your location? Because considering the difficulty of going west.
Right. In general, we are gonna have very minor truck traffic at this location.
So you probably wouldn't be running trucks to the west.
Yeah, I'm certainly not planning on it. We're anticipating at max load, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 trucks a week, box trucks, not semis. And so we're gonna be 2 trucks a day neighborhood. And so we're not anticipating a large load. That's why that loading dock's only 40 feet. Is we're not planning, the city was talking about blocking the street, having semi-loading and unloading from street level. I believe 10 o'clock was the limit. And we don't want to utilize that at all. It's not important. This location is primarily about the tasting room, getting people to experience the distilling process. We have a very unique distilling process, being able to have them experience the barrels, and then enjoy a cocktail in a beautiful location. And so the warehousing and distribution will be a separate operation.
Any other questions, Fiona?
Did you get a chance to look at the criteria related to the demolition or relocation of the building? Because it's actually a little more involved than people think. Not, in other words, it shouldn't be an obstacle, but kind of the way it's written, it's kind of involved as to criteria that you have to meet in order to either demolish or actually the preference is that it be moved. And if it can't be moved, then it goes to, okay, if it's gonna be demolished, here's what you need to take into account.
Yeah, the way that demolition part 4 of the guidelines are written, it's kind of strikes me that whether I guess my question would be, if it's determined for the guidelines to be a non-contributing structure, would it apply the same way was what
Yeah, because when you look
what
at
I'm
it,
curious about,
it
because
says-
when you read it, it kind of seems like any building would want to say regard, but because I think we presuppose.
Yeah, I
it
mean,
says
that's
historic building or structure, so either historic building or structure located within the district, so that kind of covers everybody in the district conforming, you know, I mean,
Contributing or
or non-contributing.
yeah, and that's why I sort of bring it up. In other words, I don't think the intent I don't think the intent probably was to make it an obstacle. But to comply with those requirements might be a little more involved than it is, than it
Right.
seems at first look, so that probably needs to be looked into further.
Well, there are 4 pretty specific steps in the application just to demolish it.
Right, and that, yeah, there's 4 specific things that need to be provided as part of the demolition application, and that probably should also be looked to. I don't know that those would be an obstacle, but there are 4 things that need to be done as part of it, in effect, as part of the demolition application.
Yeah, because they'd have to go for a COA for us first to do the demolition and then a COA for the building.
Or the logic would be is that we do them both in the same hearing and we do the new building first and then the demolition. So there's no sort of gap or uncertainty as to what's
That
being
makes
done.
sense.
So you wouldn't want to,
Right,
It's stuck
it
with
doesn't help us with demolishing the
Yeah.
building if we can't build something.
yeah, because if you get approval for the new building, but you don't get approval for demolishing what's there.
Right,
Yeah, and number 4 of that application is a plan for redevelopment of the property, so it does make
Which
sense.
would be,
that
which would be this.
The plan for, redevelopment.
I get, just to circle back, because it's my largest concern. What could be done to mitigate the height issue? It seems, that the building is probably of scale just because there's nothing to compare it to. We're, hundreds of feet away from the buildings, and what will be there is the same height as, what's.
Well, a couple of things to mention regarding that, to take into account, see if you're gonna have to go for a variance anyway, because these will likely come up. Because I was a planner here several years ago, so these came up while I was here. There was a proposal to build 3-story apartment buildings behind Safeway. There was significant neighborhood opposition to the idea of 3 stories. The second issue is what kind of shadow a building that tall is going to cast. It sort of makes the case where maybe it should be on the other side of this valley, on the north side of the valley, in terms of how much chance it has. Because that was the other issue that came up on the Safeway is the houses across the street, how much more of the time were they going to be in the shade if those apartment buildings?
That I actually looked at, I did not include it in the narrative, but the shadow from this, in the wintertime, the worst, ends up putting it at the front of the building. And so because it's set so far back, its shadow doesn't actually leave itself.
Okay, there's,
It does east and west, but
Yeah.
north and south.
I don't think it's in the comprehensive plan, but it might be in the East End plan, where there's an analysis of different height districts, taller height
Yeah,
districts.
that's in these things.
Okay, so that's been looked at.
Well, obviously this site is outside of the East End district, so.
Right, but I mean,
doesn't have
it did sort of that
considerations,
analysis of,
But on the East End, there's certain buildings, mostly on the northern side of Carl Boulevard that are up to 48 feet.
There's a map that shows
In the,
proposed density based on sun movement.
I can pull that up quick as well.
That'd be
But
awesome.
that, of course, is only for the East End district, so I guess that same analysis
Yeah.
hasn't necessarily.
it's just more, it's sort of helpful in understanding that analysis was done there, and maybe that helps inform what's going on here.
Patty?
What height would still allow you to make your whiskey taste the way you want it to taste if we?
There's no way to answer that question, unfortunately. Because nobody has built a variety of sizes of brick house in a similar location to say, well, this brick house created this and this brick house created that. Unfortunately, we basically have two answers. We have the current warehouse heights down in Denver, which are typically 25 to 30 feet. So the 35-foot total building height, once we add in the roof structure, sprinklers, we're actually set down about 5 feet from the total height. And so we know what that is. In between that and this, to my knowledge, nothing has really been constructed. And so if you guys said, well, we have, 50 feet at Bojo's, that's all you get. Okay.
Bojo's gets pulled into this discussion a lot in a lot of our things.
It was just an example.
No, it's, this is nothing about, we hear, what about Bojo's? But Bojo's did a lot of the stuff that they did before we had an HPRC. And part of our concern is that we preserve the historic district. Like, I completely understand what you're saying, but this is still in the historic district, so it's our responsibility to look at preserving the historic district. Because if we let you guys do it, somebody else is like, well, Bojo's and Blue Sky.
And that's why we're here.
Yeah, I know it is. I will say this property, I think, is different from the other ones in the historic district because most of them have direct neighbors. You can at least draw a comparison to the building next door. And in this case, with particularly where we're putting the barrel house, it's so far set back from its neighbors that it draws less of a comparison. You couldn't do this anywhere else on Minor.
We would tell you no right away.
And so that, I think this is a special location that could be a clear exception to say, okay, it's doable if you're 100 feet away from the nearest property. And then scale is different.
And generally that works along the lines of it's basically not visible from a public way. And as I mentioned before, it is still partially visible from Minor Street.
Mm-hmm.
It is visible from the 17th here. And so that's one of the considerations is can it be seen from where the public is generally going to be passing it?
Yeah, I mean, and it's certainly never going to be invisible. I think on a pedestrian scale, the period of time that it's visible is very small. Even driving down 17th, it's obscured by this building immediately. And farther back, it's obscured by the park. It really just down that sidewalk. And so we're looking at a smaller period of time. Same thing with if the train gets moved. Instead of the wide open parking lot with nothing obscuring it, we're now adding a pedestrian scale obscuration at 10 feet to cover the train, which quite honestly it won't cover it from across the street, but it'll certainly cover it for most of walking down the street. And so that's where I guess my question is if we're looking to obscure, I think that's doable if we make changes, not necessarily to the building, but if we incorporate, a structure into, hey, we'll pay for building a gazebo over the train or something to incorporate it into the look, but also obscure. And so that's, I guess, the questions. I realize in and of itself, it's not what we would hope for, what you would hope for.
No, it's not.
No, and so what
I
do
feel
we?
really strongly about the 35 feet.
Yeah, and so that's, if we can do something to make it so that it isn't obtrusive to the people around here, then would that then make it okay?
the thing is, I don't know how you make it, you know, unobtrusive. Yes, we've talked about moving the train, but this is one of those things where you have to do this without like changing other people's property or changing the property around it. Again, I struggle because I like the idea. I'm being very honest about where my sticking point is.
No, and I think it's a reasonable sticking point. I'm not trying to change your mind. I guess it's trying to figure out what the path could be.
So let me ask you this, is there another place, now I know you said this is the best place, is there another place that you have looked at in Idaho Springs? You know, because one of the things, if you're looking at this from a historic district and you want to capture that historic district traffic, which is totally legit. You know, we're actually working on making East End more viable.
Yeah.
Are there other places that you've looked where this would work?
We were actually, the city had some ideas of other properties we could look at. And at this point in time, the only one that's become serious consideration is the used car lot or whatever, the junkyard.
There are other locations, in some in the East End, but our strong preference would be to be in the historic district.
But one of the big problems, and we've addressed this, the city's parking. If we locate in the historic district, we can pay into the parking structure to accommodate the parking that would come with this building. If we did not, we would need to build 60 to 80 parking spaces around the building. It's almost an acre of parking that would be required in addition to the building.
So you're anticipating that based on the space and what your footage is, like your commercial footage.
Based on the city guidelines,
city guidelines,
we're at
60 to 80
60,
spaces.
we're at 60 before I added the rooftop over the office space.
Well,
Talking about the East End is a good segue to what Mike was asking about, which is the shade study, which actually, so this building is not part of the East End overlay district, so this shade study is not necessarily relevant to this building, but when they did the shade, I stand corrected, it does actually include City Hall and 1743 on the west end as kind of like a contemplated from shade perspective, potentially up to 46 feet. Now, where that plays a role is in the East End overlay district, which again, this 1743 Minor Street's not a part of it, but where you go to the East End, very far east, you know, where you're considering Allied Towing, which is in this area, and some of these other structures like the Wildfire Academy, whatever it's called.
the old wildfire.
The old wildfire.
Yeah.
You know, this 4 zone potentially corresponds to up to 57 feet. And if you look at our East End overlay district building standards height, it does speak to using the sun access and building height diagram to do so. So, you know, that's outside the bounds, of course, of this conversation, because if you're in the East End, you're out of the historic district, and then we wouldn't apply
You wouldn't have to
historic
talk to us
guidelines.
at all.
But
Right.
theoretically, you
But
know,
like I said, it is what we want to be. If we had any choice, that's where we would choose to be.
The creek is more attractive right there, I mean.
Right, and that as
it's-
well.
It's a better property aesthetically, it's a better property from a drawing people in, I get that.
though I would argue,
But the East End, though, that's a very prominent, very visible location. It's
That's true,
literally-
too.
It is the
Easy to
entry
get
to town, so you,
Easier to park in.
and any of the buildings on the north side of Colorado Boulevard are adjacent to the creek as well. So from like a plane perspective.
the
Oh,
houses,
that's true,
the
from the north
multifamily
side.
houses.
Yeah, so like the wildfire or the, any of those buildings. on
Oh, I
that
was
side
just
of the
thinking about
street
Allied, where Allied
Could,
used to
and
be.
Allied would be incredibly visible from the highway, whereas you'd be slightly less so on the north side, but you could have a really cool deck patio area. Regardless,
That's a pretty part of the creek
the
too.
other benefit that for you guys
Mhm.
potentially is that the East End does have this kind of more allowance with the height. So, you know, 57 potentially, you know, going through the process is a lot closer to where you're trying to be now than.
Although I am curious about that 45 for here.
But that's not relevant because this is the historic district.
No, I mean, in terms of
East End.
trying to make something that might be palatable. It gives a number from an independent source.
let's say one other location, and this probably just adds complexity to it. But has there been any discussion about talking to Argo? Because they have so much property and this would be a very complementary use to Argo.
I would say that in terms of alternative locations, we would love to work with you guys on finding that.
Yeah.
But I think the real important question is the impact on the historic district. Like, we definitely, if this site doesn't work for you, we don't want you to go away. We'd love to help you from economic development perspective, because I think you have a cool project and I think we can work together on it. But in terms of other sites, I think there's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of there's potentially a lot of things that might need to go into that conversation to make it
For
function.
any site, of course,
Yeah.
but
And with respect to the historic district, I mean, we, not only do we want to be here, but we feel like this project is both additive and complementary to the district, even if perhaps the height isn't from the perspective of the guidelines that you were following. We are making a historically specific, like, period style whiskey that works just very well with the concept of being in the historic district here, and we want to both
It
benefit
makes it easier
from
to
being
tell
in-
our story if we're in a historic context.
One benefit from not only being in the historic district, but also give a lot of people a great reason to come to the historic district. To not only experience the historic district, but then also a period appropriate beverage, so.
I don't think that with any of us have, I mean, I haven't heard anything, so I can't speak for myself. I actually like the idea. I like the idea of a historic distillery. My concern is, and it's not really you guys per se, but it's if we let one exception happen, then other people are like, why can't we have that exception too? You know, so there has to be, and it doesn't actually even come down to us, it's a variance, but we can also say, no, we don't approve it because we don't like the height restriction.
Well, that's where I was asking if there's a way, if we got the exception, to write it such that it couldn't apply to anybody else.
You can always write things to do that. It's a matter of being diligent to stand up. You can always write things that are point to this is a unique situation, what's unique about it, and that's actually would be written into the approval, is that these are the findings, and the findings, before saying what the conditions are, you would say, we have found these things that make this a unique situation.
So that wouldn't prevent other people from using that as an example, but officially it maybe couldn't be used.
Thinking very outside the box here, is this site even necessarily within the historic district?
Yes.
There's no way to.
No,
Boundary line
it
adjustment.
would require us to move our historic district, and I love the idea, but no, we're not going to facilitate.
It's a very small sliver, right on the area.
given that it's nationally registered. and-
Yeah, we're a national
Okay.
register site, so.
And the state might have a problem. Because actually, I think they'd have to be at the minimum notified that we're changing the boundaries of the historic
Oh,
district.
God. I can't even.
We're just gonna pretend that question.
No,
That's why
this
he's
is,
the expert.
no, it's actually better that you come and talk to us. We're not adversarial.
No,
You
no,
know,
not
we're
at all.
not trying to make you feel like, no,
And that's why my
I've heard
question
it.
is,
But,
I
yeah.
understand there's a problem, and I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat that. It's just a question of what can be done, or can something be done to provide the mitigation or to give you a reason to say yes to the exception.
I think that's where you're going to have to talk with the city more. I don't know, how do you guys feel about this?
I think it is too tall. I'm just sort of picturing myself walking down the street and seeing this, and it would really stand out just. based on the
Well, and
height.
if you look at where it is too, so we have the senior center right there, which is one of our taller buildings. And then you have the rafting company, so it's a mixture of residential and commercial. It's not plopped right in the middle of residential, but it's still going to be, if you're coming east going to west, because you see that 72 feet down by the creek, that's going to be really big. So
Not as bad as the hotel in Black Hawk, but sort of a smaller version of what happened in Black Hawk.
well, and that's aesthetically though, that's not, like, I could not approve that aesthetic.
Well, and that's where I think trying to make it look like it belong, maybe not from a height perspective, but if there's other things that can be done to make it less visually intrusive.
Well, you can find warehouse structures that size from the 19th century, that's.
Yeah, this is
That's
absolutely,
actually not a problem, and particularly the rich sort of, the Romanesque style, there, you'll find a lot of that even in industrial buildings.
yeah, this is actually a design I stole from a distillery in Pennsylvania.
So brick is planned for the facade then, that's.
Yes.
Yeah, and they said that it was like a.
True masonry,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna actually, it's made a brick on the outside, and then we're gonna do a CMU interior and then brick again. For the barrel house, because it has to be 2 feet thick to justify the height. The core building is gonna be just at 12 inches with a brick exterior CMU, and then we'll be drywalling in the tasting room.
I will say to you what I think we say to everyone is that there is a potential to get to a yes, but you're gonna have to work with the city to find a reason why this would be an exception. The height is not like the height is the sticking point. And if the height doesn't work for you because you need that height for the process.
And like I said, making an adjustment, we had no proof that 60 feet doesn't work as well as 65 feet. And to a certain extent, we're certainly willing to give some. I think 35 feet we can say doesn't work.
I think the guidelines are a little stronger than that on this issue. Number 2 for new construction is scale and proportion of a structure will be a primary consideration.
Yep.
And that's where I was trying in the narrative to show what the scale would be. Particularly with the 35 feet on minor, now obviously like we've talked about, there's the parking lot gap. But in those drawings, it shows a building that is adjacent to other structures. When discussing scale, it's talking about ensuring rooftops are lined up, that we have floors lined up, windows, cornices. And from a minor perspective, those will all, you could take this facade, the front of this building, and move it anywhere on minor and it would line up. In fact, the shop window there is stolen off of Bojo's. It is designed to look the same.
I think there's a lot you can do from a character standpoint, but in the end, there's several of these points that basically say how big a building it is compared to what's already.
Yeah, it's a
here.
scale and proportion of the structure will be a primary consideration. And if you look, it shows the picture, too tall, and that's where we're stuck, is the
Yeah.
too tall piece.
And I just, my question is, it shows the adjacent buildings. And so if there was nothing adjacent to it, how do you determine scale?
The only thing I might say on that is, in that section, reading it now, B under that says, respect the building scale established by historic structures within the district or the neighborhood. So I think like in that respect, it does ask to consider the district as a whole potentially,
Okay.
even if it's not directly
Not like
adjacent.
the immediate surroundings.
And I might be,
Okay.
And that one's not a should, that's basically,
right, because.
that's basically a must type
That's a mu-
statement.
that's a
Because a
will.
lot of that does say should, which we've talked about in the past.
But the one that you said though is basically says, it's not a gray area, it's a definite statement.
Right, so I think that might be
Okay.
what makes it harder, right? That's what I'm hearing.
So I guess then the related question, it would be, at what point are we of a scale? Is it 35 feet? Is it 50 feet, since it would not be the only 50-foot structure? Is it,
How tall are those senior apartments that are like kind of right, the Mitchell?
They're not in the historic district.
Right, but
Those
just
are
kind of for a
four
scale
stories?
No, but she's
surrounding.
just asking for a scale
Yeah.
perspective.
4 stories, 5 stories?
Three,
They're actually 3, we go by and saw them,
yeah.
but they're very tall floor to floor, they look like they're.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, another building that there was some controversy about was the clinic
Yeah.
in terms of how tall the tower was.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And that came back to planning commission in terms of, planning commission thought what was built was too tall. And so we had to basically show, no, it does actually match the plans that were approved.
Yeah, I don't, and I will say, I think the Bojo's is taller than 35, but that's when you also consider the chimney. I've not measured it, but I think the roof is close to 35, if not slightly over.
No.
Is it? Oh, wow, okay. Trying to look at the back, not looking at the back.
Are there any three-story buildings?
35 feet to the,
Downtown?
Yeah, are there any that are three?
I don't think so. Even the,
Really tall ceilings.
yeah, they have tall ceilings.
Two tall stories.
The reason I ask
Yeah.
is,
Two very tall.
we don't have a guideline for this now, but there are other districts where basically say, okay, we were predominantly a two-story district. However, under these circumstances, we would consider a third floor. So in other words, that would pick up another, say, 12 feet. You know, we're talking about looking at our guidelines, but we don't have that guideline, but there are other
No,
districts that have that kind of guideline.
And I will say we're 3 floors, but our upper floors are intentionally short to reach the guideline. We're 9 feet and 8 feet for the second and third floor, just so that we can.
and it's 4 floors?
Depends on how you count things.
Yeah.
So we have a basement,
And that's
ground,
gonna be the basement that will be below, like parking lot level.
correct,
That'll be like creekside,
correct.
okay?
So probably from our perspective, that's
Street level.
below grade.
Yeah,
That
and so
That was not counted.
that's correct, and it's not counted in the 65. Then we have a 15-foot ground level.
And that's not unusual for Main Street.
It's actually short compared to some of them. I believe Bojo's
So
is 20.
15, okay.
And then we have 9 feet for the second floor and 8 for the third.
And there are second floors that are taller than that, existing buildings.
24, that puts it to 33? No,
35 exactly.
35 exactly.
And you'd have several feet more for the cornice line.
We're actually setting the floors down for that purpose. The cornice line is included in that. So we would be, ideally, the plan is basically floor level at the rooftop is 35 feet.
So that's not the 50 feet. that-
So the majority of this building, and that's what I tried to show, if you look at this first one, the gray area
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
35 feet.
That height doesn't seem to be a problem. I don't think we actually have something that says specifically 2 stories, although that is what we have. It talks more about the height of the building. as
It
opposed
does
to
talk
the
more
number of
about, it
stories.
doesn't talk about the stories.
Yeah, so
because-
it's in the height, and we do have buildings that are in the height range of the, you know, slightly above 30.
And I apologize, that wasn't clear. That's why we talk about this setback, is it's just this dark portion that is
No, that's,
out of scale, where it's 2,000 square feet of this building.
and it's just that that's going to be visible, but that's color, so.
Yes,
So the light gray is all right at 35 feet.
yes, ma'am.
And then the dark.
There's
gray-
actually a section that's currently designed to be shorter.
Well, it looks, you
but-
actually saw that in the,
Yeah,
in the side views, that it's tall and then a little shorter
yes.
and then much taller.
And that may change. We're having some internal debates about just run the rooftop all the way across and maintain it. Currently, there's no reason to do that, but,
I'm sorry, Hazel.
and so that lower section is at, or 25 feet.
And then the back section to the rooftop level is,
64 and a half.
now is it 64.5 from grade?
Yes.
Okay, so that's actually quite a bit more than the 50, which is,
No, but that's the question is if we chopped it down and we took 15 feet, does that now
that
move
puts
us
it at
into,
49.
is this a yes? And that's what we're trying to get to, hopefully today, is to figure out what we have to do to make this, because we love the location. We have reasons that we want to be
No, no,
crazy.
that's fine, that's like,
But,
that's none of our
we
concern,
really
but-
do want to be here and not the East End or other locations, because like I said, you know, the other reasons. And so it's, what do we have to do to get to yes is more where we're at today. And if it's 35 and we're just another distillery, Okay, maybe it's time to look at other options because I don't wanna just be another distillery.
They're not likely gonna be able to tell you that they can give you a yes definitively because you'd have to go to a hearing.
Certainly, and I guess the question is, what can we do to get, what makes a yes?
Yeah.
A possibility before we spend $1 million in design fees.
I gotcha.
How about 35?
And that may be the answer, and then, like I said, we can,
Would be worthwhile to do another session where you come back with more information.
what more information would you like?
What I'd be interested in seeing is, and it doesn't have to be even to the level of detail you have there, but actually a full section from Minor to the interstate. And say from 17th to the creek.
I don't have the details for this building.
That shouldn't be difficult to get. I'm trying to think. Well, we have these set of plans for this building.
Yeah, I just don't
Actually, we have
have them. We actually discussed doing that on the Minor.
we have them here.
If you're willing to share, I'm happy to integrate.
This is all public information.
But like, I said, no, I'll happily.
I think that would help. That would help give an understanding, or almost it's saying go across 17th Street to get the beginning of the commercial building. And again, it can be much simpler than this. In other words, it's sort of a block diagram. So we can see this height, this height, this height, this height.
Yeah, if we can have the information to put in, unfortunately, most of what I'm working with at this point is either Google Street View or the county GIS. And so even the street views that I provided are an estimate of what I think we're working with.
And see, the county GIS is 10 feet. I think, doesn't the city have 2-foot contours?
The county has 2-foot contours, but they don't include the buildings.
Okay.
So we don't know, I can do the ground level, but I don't have any information on what actually, how tall the little tower is or what the rooftop height is for this building to appropriately drop.
We have a site survey
Oh.
of the site,
I would love that.
and we have the drawings, that show
'Cause I can-
elevations.
Because I can absolutely put that into our CAD. That was something I was trying to do. But unfortunately, when I integrated the Google Street View, it's too weird. I couldn't figure out how to draw a building appropriately in there that actually was a fair representation.
I think there's something else too.
Yeah, well, I just want to share something with you, because we're designing a train shelter.
Oh.
And so we have a site plan, we have a section cut through the train
Fantastic.
shelter. And just want to make you aware that there's actually an existing easement along the west property line, the shared boundary
Okay.
of the west side of your property.
But not ours yet.
Well, 10 feet, you can't build 10 feet each side of the property
okay.
line. Yeah, that kind of shows it's an access easement for the sharing of the two.
Oh, that looks
properties.
pretty close to what's
Yeah.
represented. Yeah, so I believe that may already be accounted for.
No,
If you're showing,
Is that the access easement behind the parking structure right there?
no, the easement is actually over into this area.
Yeah, so this is not in the building. This is excluded from the site.
so your building footprint, where is the edge of your building?
Over basically where the fence is, you can
Oh, okay,
see,
right here,
yeah,
okay.
it basically only occupies,
You'd be okay. You would-
because,
you would not
yeah,
be-
because we were aware of that. It's one of the things that makes this an odd shaped lot that requires some of the reason you can see it from Minor, and I wish it was a rectangular building, so I could have a different conversation, but.
And there's a kind of elevation of what it might look like, so.
Well, and in that location, that breaks up that sight line
It really does.
quite bad, yeah. So then, let's see, there's one also.
When I put together this minor
Secret now.
view, would you mind if I drop that in there?
That's up to them, it's their.
Well, I meant from showing the perspective of what it would look like and
Well,
heights and scale,
Yeah,
it would certainly.
anything that helps to understand it, it's just, we don't want to push you into spending a lot of money.
This is affordable design time. When we have to bring in architects that are doing, let's call it quality work, as opposed to an engineer bashing things out.
The other thing you can do, one of the other things you can do for the buildings on Minor Street across 17, using, using Street View, and putting that together with, the Sanborn maps, you can see how wide the lots are, so you can just do a simple ratio and get the height of the building.
I've tried that, and that's how I created the scales that I have. It's when I start meshing multiple street views together, that it started looking off, and the perspectives got weird.
And that's sort of reason for doing it on a block basis
Yeah.
rather than putting the detail in. Because what we're interested in is knowing how tall things are.
Right. Yeah, I should be able to, particularly with the additional information on the buildings, be able to create that. And I don't think that's any imposition at all.
That would be good, because that, I mean, that remains my sticking point. What about you guys?
The height, definitely.
Michael?
I don't know if we have a way around it. I mean,
No, it's
kind
part
of
of our
black,
code.
it's kind of black and white.
Yeah.
So I guess if there's no way around it, there's probably not a lot of reason to do the drawing. I mean, I'm happy to do it if it's helpful. But if it's just a long way to get to, it's not doable, then it's not doable, and it's easier to start moving on to other plans. And so I guess I go back to the initial question of, is there a number where scale starts to feel the same? And is it only 35 feet because it's the city code, or is it 20 feet or 2 stories? What, regardless of height, is it
No, it's
50 feet because of, you know, the shade study? Is there a
It's
number
35 feet because that is our code.
The-
And I
the
think
peak
you could have,
To the eve line.
if it was 5 feet more, you might have a shot with the variance board and not a whole, but Michael had a really good point. If you guys saw the wellness center, the fussing over the wellness center, and is that too tall? Like, I remember that, there was a lot of outcry. That building was built to the plans that were approved, but it's the perception. And so, and Shannon also brought up a good point that if you're coming west and you see it, that's really tall. So does that change the character, even setting aside just for a minute, that 35 feet, does that change the character of how it looks? Even before we look at the 35 feet, and what is the visual perception? So to me, like, I don't see a way around the 35 feet. And I hate saying that to you.
That's why we're here. I'd rather hear that today than in a year.
What does the rest of the commission think? I'm only one of us.
I agree.
Patty?
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean,
Well, if it says in the code that that's all we can do is 35 feet, that's all we can do is 35 feet.
There is no number in the code.
well, what it says though.
Or the guidelines.
Yes.
No, I'm looking at
Okay.
design guidelines, not so much looking at the building code.
Right.
Looking at design guidelines that are focused on the historic district. And it's the proportion, and so 35 feet is where we cap from a proportion standpoint, and we can see how even proportion gets, the visual proportion gets set out of scale, just by the way people look at it. And I don't see a way around that one. Because yes, it is at the edge of the historic district. I do see some of your discussion about, being next to the highway, like.
Because 35 feet is shorter than where the highway currently is located.
Yes, but it's still part of our historic district, so.
Yeah.
Barring moving our boundaries, I don't think.
Oh,
We
you-
didn't have
question,
that
yeah.
discussion, remember?
Yeah,
That question was
Yeah,
ponderous.
I don't see how we do that.
Right.
I actually really like the design. I like the brick and
I do too.
the windows and stuff. I think that is really cool. It's just the height is certainly a sticking point.
Yeah.
And I would hate to poo-poo on your idea of like an actual historic brick house with the process and the story behind it. I don't see how you're gonna squeeze in there.
Well, I mean, squeezing it isn't the challenge. It's doing it in a scale appropriate to the district. Like I said, we can chop 10 feet off of it and no one will know that the story is slightly wrong. But it doesn't sound like 10 feet is the solution to this conversation. And so that's what I'm trying to, I guess,
No,
understand. It's not a yes or a
I don't think it
no.
is. I don't think
You
it
know,
is.
if we, you know, if 50 feet was a solution, then we could go back and do the block diagram at 50 feet and see if that works. But if 50 feet on a gut check says it's still crazy, then it's crazy and we need
One of
to,
those crazy is just this, that it doesn't work. for us.
crazy that, yeah, and so.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. And so that's what I guess what we're trying
The
to.
follow-up question, I suppose, is then, is there anything about the plans if they were 35 feet across the board that are objectionable to the historical?
I didn't see anything and I read them pretty carefully.
Yeah, I'd say no, which is one of Dylan's.
We would just have to
questions.
have like a historically, visually accurate, relatively accurate. They do like to see,
It comes down to the facade.
yes.
Yeah, the shape
If
of the
you,
window.
if you've got the mass in compliance with the guidelines, then it's to the facade looks like it fits in.
And we are flexible on appearance and want to fit in. Right. Again, I don't know if abandoning the Rick House idea is on the table for us or not. But if it were, right, we're simply creating a production facility with a tasting room. It's 35 feet across the board. It doesn't sound like, from a historical review committee's perspective, there's a problem with that in this location.
I wouldn't think so.
No, so I like the design, like I said, it's just the height.
I like the idea too of something that is industrial looking at the edge of our historic district. I don't know that I would plop it right in the middle of the historic district. But if you look at older historic districts, a lot of them have mixed industrial. And this is not a non-conforming building, so it's building new construction in a way that fits in
Actually, before the interstate went in, it was all industrial along the river.
along the creek, yeah. it
And
was.
you had some very big buildings, not necessarily tall, but very
Took up a
big,
lot of space.
very big footprint
Yeah.
buildings, and they were all basically mills for processing.
Yeah, if you look at those two pictures there on the site where the city hall is, there's like not a tall warehouse, but a pretty big warehouse looking building. That has a pretty large mass, I was just looking at it today, so it's.
So yes, that,
Okay.
like, I don't see a problem if it fit within our height restrictions. We would be a much, I think, in a better place to get to, yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
That, please,
I
that's what,
would love to be able to add, to get to 50 feet. I think at that height, or maybe 45 feet, add an extra 10 on there so that you get the actual look
of the
of
brick house.
what they're proposing. And I know you said you don't know if you're gonna make the same kind of whiskey at 50 feet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain guess,
65, you know, and I love the way it looks also, but I think if we go down to 35 feet, it's not going to have the same effect of what it is at that reduced.
It takes
It
away
will
from the
certainly have
visual
more of a
effect.
warehouse look.
Yeah,
There's no
whereas
doubt about
this
that.
it's unique, it's cool, who else has one? And I know it doesn't fit into all, it's a square trying to go into a round hole, but I kind of like that stuff. So that's
So then,
my opinion, but again, what the committee elects to do is what we have to do, so.
What's your ability to block this portion being used from Minor Street?
Well, we don't own that land, and so I mean,
where are you looking, Mike?
the parking lot,
Okay.
that is the train.
Basically, so that this taller building can't be seen from the street.
But that's where your finger is city property.
Right.
And so that is the train that I've been talking about. The train pavilion would,
Yeah, just so you get the, we've talked about, from, I guess it's still in council or is it planning? I don't know.
I think it's not.
Moving the train from, the south side and moving it along the east side, because when you put the coach on there and then you put the pavilion, it's not gonna have enough
Right there to
space.
there.
Yeah, so it's gonna go,
The track used to go about here.
I'd love to have a
Gonna
train in
go,
front of the distillery.
right
you have no
Train is
idea how
right
much I
here.
would love to include this in our
Like,
project.
like the train here, because we need the space for the coach and the pavilion. Oh, and Tim may have it, because we just talked about this.
And of course, the other caveat with all of this is needing the variance board stuff for, even if HPRC had more leeway or comes up with leeway, then it's also a battle there, which,
And we understand those are two completely separate.
And we're
Yeah,
happy to
we're-
sit
we're
down
not
and have
like-
another conversation, and, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a question of what can we do to try to make this vision, which again, square peg in a round hole, but make this vision work, and if it's helping to incorporate this pavilion, I mean, please, let us, we would love to be involved with the train.
I have, yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I saw the council. It's like they're moving the parking, and the parking will move over here. Here.
It's a good idea.
This,
Yeah, because we don't have enough
the
room.
sidewalk on this.
And so basically, from me taking right, so the idea is the train pavilion would block this,
Yeah,
and
that's-
add it
I just
into.
want to make sure they understand this concept to the sight line, from my district.
And that's across my house.
It's fairly sizable, height wise.
The ridge here basically lines up with the eve of this building,
Okay,
so
what is the eve of this building?
it's 22 feet
22
above
feet.
grade at the
Above
east
grade,
side.
okay.
Yeah, so this is 23.
That should be really close to making the barrel house invisible.
Dylan,
You can see how far over we are here, so lowering it down to 22 feet instead of 35 should still give us that, the clearance that we would need.
This
And
is
so
the
they're-
representation of the view line from a 6-foot pedestrian standing across.
I don't know if you have.
Well, not out of it.
Exactly, and that's why I'm trying to show it, now it is freaking.
Or even at 65 feet, standing across Minor Street, you can see the barrel house past the facade of the tasting.
I'm gonna pull out the train.
And so that's where if we could extend it over, again, not our property, but if we can work with
Oh, the
with the
little,
train
the iron
pavilion.
fence, so it'd be going
This-
all like. all
this
the way
drawing
up here.
changes, we basically could extend this across, and this upper portion would disappear from,
Um,
of the pedestrian or vehicle
so that's-
standpoint.
I can-
Does that
That's not much.
start making it of the correct scale?
It helps.
So I pulled up on the.
Because
screen
generally the idea
the
when you go
kind of
taller,
preliminary
it
plans
needs
for
to
that
not be physical
location.
Absolutely.
So
Anyway, that's
like.
Okay, so
Right.
it'd be like all the
Here
way
now.
down. like-
Also,
If you go.
You're gonna-
blocking
you're gonna-
view from that any gap does
This is
help.
23 feet?
Yeah, 23 feet.
Okay,
And I put this, pulled it up on the screen.
okay.
So you can see the kind of scale of the train structure as proposed preliminarily, and this went on April 8th to council as a work session item. Looks to be 23 feet grade. And here's kind of the side view.
And Tim said that the 23 foot at the top lines up with the eve along this building.
That's, the eve of this building is at 22 feet above grade along the east side of the building. Just for perspective.
And you can see
Scale.
that.
Scale.
And then we have the roof above that
Right.
eave. What is the height of this at the?
35 feet,
Okay,
30, it's actually 35.7, something like that.
okay,
Pretty
so
close to
rough,
35.
What is the bell tower? Is that another?
It is,
Yeah, here.
I don't believe it's,
That's
it's
a.
higher than the ridge.
it's-
No, it actually looks like it's
Well,
lines.
slightly higher, but it's,
Not much. Not much.
well, yeah, from different elevations, it looks to be.
yeah.
It looks like it's the same.
Perhaps even.
A little like, a
If
little
you
bit
consider
lower,
the
yeah.
fact that the grade, you can see.
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
page, the grade
So this is
lower,
35,
the grade goes up,
7.
So I would guess that.
So
they're
that would put
similar.
that building,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And say again what you were saying about the 22 feet and bringing it down to.
Yeah, so we were just making the point that if we redrew this, again with the sight line of our guide that's buried in my actual drawings here. This is at 35 feet where the obstruction is, and it pushes us so far over the tower there that I would venture to guess that if we dropped this down 10 feet, that tower would still be at least invisible, or if not invisible,
I
if we
don't
lowered it 5 feet.
The one at the bottom of the sightline, that's the one that's facing Minor, correct?
This is actually the 17th Street view. This man
Oh,
is
the
standing
17th.
on Minor,
Oh,
on the
okay.
opposite side of the street.
Oh, I see.
And so this is actually basically with his back to the police station.
Okay,
No, this guy's standing with his back to the bank building.
the bank building, so he's actually standing on Minor, looking.
Yes.
But the view we're looking at is from
Yes,
here.
it is
Yeah.
the section from 17th looking east, but it's kind of representing what the sightline would be from Minor.
But I don't know that necessarily, the sightline from Minor is not, I think, as problematic as the sightline from 17th.
Certainly, and that's, I mean, to a certain extent, aside from, if the train goes away, we can move trees in to that space in the park and obscure the building.
What do you guys think? I think if, maybe not going into any more, drawings.
Yeah. You know what, do you need our survey and our drawings?
Can I give you guys a card? And
You guys are neighbors.
Yeah, we're neighbors, actually.
Oh, very cool.
We live in Evergreen too.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll definitely have to talk.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. If you could talk with the city about Minor, because I'm still stuck on the 35 feet, but if, we never know what the variance board is going to do, and the variance board may say 10 feet is fine, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's probably good for you to have more discussion with staff about that. Just like I said, we did have two examples, the clinic and the apartment buildings, where it was controversial.
But also, we also know that the variance board, the last time the variance board overlooked one of our decision, they took, good look at our decision and looked at
Remember too, that a variance is an extraordinary remedy, right? You can't just get a variance because you want one. There has to be like a reason.
It's a hardship
Right.
that you did not create.
Correct. So that could be the other conversation here.
Right, but that's what we're making, is that should be looked at, because even if we were to say yes, it needs to be some further investigation of what are the prospects of actually getting a yes from the variance board.
That hardship standard would apply in any location in Idaho Springs.
Right.
Potentially,
Yes.
There's actually like 6 different criteria.
they're not, I don't think they're
Well,
it's
it looks to
insurmountable.
be
One is the
about
question is
35
making better
And then it's
whiskey.
raised up
or-
about-
And I mean, it probably depends on, I don't mean to be
Depends on,
flippant
I guess,
about it,
if
but
it
that
goes into
is
the
the
park.
question that we're struggling
Well,
with.
where you would start with is you have an odd shaped lot.
Certainly,
Yeah.
and it's with creek removed, it's a very small one.
That's-
Sidewalk right there.
The size of the lot,
Yeah, that about
shape
adds
of the
another
lot
story.
are some of the most basic
Yeah.
reasons people see of areas. Doesn't mean it gets approved, but those are some of the most basic reasons someone comes in and asks for a variance.
That's a pretty good case in general, I think. But there's like the criteria, there's the criteria in the code, and you can see, but we can talk about that, and we'd be happy to keep talking with you guys about this, and there's even potentially other lots that might work, like I have one in mind that you could use a different process called a PD process, that you could actually create some of the underlying zoning for this to work
Okay.
potentially.
Okay.
And that would maybe make it easier, and it has some
And
historic elements.
and after this meeting, I've had a couple thoughts that I'd like to discuss with you guys, but I do think it's somewhat important to have the barrel house co-located with the distillery and the tasting room. Because it's easier to tell the story than to say, hey, we're doing something cool way over there.
I actually, I understand, I agree with that from
yeah.
the commercial side of things. like-
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, we're here to try to make some
No,
money
you
as
wanna-
well.
It's supposed to be good return on your investment.
Right.
And in effect, that becomes the anchor of this end of Main Street.
Exactly, and we have discussed extending the shared drinking space down farther to increase the walkability of all of Minor. And I mean, obviously we're making progress, but it was part of our initial discussions. And it's something we certainly would like to be a part of, is making the street not stop on the other side of City Hall.
I guess one of the things to bring up, and I don't know if we have a guideline for it, but sort of the relationship of your building to the creek.
Mhm.
In terms of how does it meet the creek, what's
So we're actually planning on improving that in my mind. We want to set back, so if you look at the darker section on that overview,
Right here,
that is the creekside, the medium shade of gray.
so this one right here.
So that is intended to be a creekside patio. And if you come over here to our basement drawings, we are planning on setting back almost 30 feet from where the current building is, to improve both visibility of the creek from Minor,
Okay, so
as well as creating a sitting area by the creek.
so you're trying to create an amenity along the creek.
That is correct.
So would you, when I'm looking at this, your take, like, if we end up moving the train, all of this parking is going to go away, so you will lose those, what are they, 7 spaces, 6?
Yeah, those are going away
Those are
no
going
matter
away,
what,
okay.
if we're
Okay.
involved. The plan is to write a very large check to the city for parking.
And then they're essentially buying into the garage.
Yes. That, which is a reason I like the historic district over not the historic district. We don't have that ability, and I really don't want to build a 1 acre parking lot. I just hate everything about it.
I don't think we've done
I just said, where do you have to, really?
Right, and like I said, I hate everything about that, and so it's another reason that the historic district is, I think, important to what we're trying to do.
My suggestion, and please, rest of the commission chime in, I think if you could have some more conversation with the city. You know our objections. Our
Yeah.
objections are that height and how it changes the surrounding area. If we made an exception, there would have to be a really good reason for it, but I think that gets into conversations with the city. How do we feel about that? You know, because it is very clear, they have to maintain, like,
Is there a problem, and it was something that came up in the discussion with the city, of the view of Old Town from the highway? And it is mentioned in the historic guidelines of obstructing the view to the historic district.
is that,
With,
Being on the edge, that.
It's definitely a thing.
and that's why I'm asking, that's something they
No,
had not
they-
discussed.
We need to talk about it probably.
is this part of, you did a site,
SHPO also has.
It is in there, it shows it's a
this
minor,
one? Yeah,
yes.
but it was just in this small area.
Right, it's a minor obstruction, but I want, it's the one thing that in my reading of it, could also be a problem with the height, so I wanted to discuss that and see if the committee actually.
We're working on that on another project right now, and I think it's gonna be something that the state takes fairly seriously, so we're trying to figure out how that's gonna work. But we're probably gonna need to look at how we think about that as a historic entity. But I don't know what exactly to say about that, other than there's been some concern about that view shed.
Now, if you're talking, if you're workable to get to 45 to 50, then does it basically disappear from the highway?
Yes,
That's what it looks like from your drawing.
yeah, I mean, in full height, I believe we're 20 feet above ground level of the highway,
Yeah,
at the
like
closest
this.
adjacent point.
Yeah,
And with the barrier for the creek passage, that drops down to
because that is a
10 to
pretty-
15 feet. Obviously the lower section there is drawn at 35 feet, so it will add, to the view of downtown. And so the question for me is it an obstruction or is it a change in the view? Is it a part of the escape of downtown? I personally don't think it's an obstruction, but I'm slightly biased.
Does this give you enough to go on to have a little bit more conversation with the city?
I mean, certainly
Yeah.
talking with the city, I think is important. I think we need to talk about the variance. And I think it's necessary to re-present to you guys with the train image, the block diagram, to show what we can do from a minor perspective.
So that we do the 2 long sections, you say block?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Minor and 17th, because.
So 17th, I think, is a challenge
Yeah,
because it's not buildings that are providing, I mean, it's a parking lot, there's nothing that's obscuring it except for the trees in the park. I think it's reasonable to be asked, hey, once the train is out of here, can you plant some large established trees to fill in the park and make the park nicer and also obscure the building? But I have questions about how authentic I can be representing that in a block diagram to you guys.
And there also used to be a large building,
Livery stable, so there was a,
right?
prior to livery, there was a,
It was sort of a tall structure with a
Yeah.
gable roof, used to sit in that location.
yeah, cause all behind you used to be the livery.
And so that's where I guess my original plan was to hope a meeting of, hey, we'll put in, you know, whatever, $20,000 worth of very large established trees to obscure the view from 17th. Cool, the building disappears, that solves an issue. But I don't know that drawing a block diagram and pretending that there are trees there that obscure the view.
I have a suggestion I'd like to offer. One of the things that we could do, you have the ability to have another pre-application meeting with the applicant. One of the things that could happen is if you give Dylan and I some leeway to work with the applicant to determine some strategies that could work. And then we have some time to interrogate that, so they have some time to think about it and look at what their resources are. We could schedule for another pre-application meeting before an application were to come before you, so that we can suss out what might be the best alternatives for you, just based on some actual data once we have it. And that would be something that we could probably do relatively efficiently, I think, if we had some time just to kind of work that through.
I think that'd be a good idea.
I think so too.
We did that with the hotel, they had 2 pre-application meetings.
Yeah.
Before their actual application.
They actually had 4 pre-application meetings,
The Opera House had 2 pre-application meetings, didn't they?
Yeah.
2 or 3.
It's not limited in code, so you have that ability.
No, I would be willing to entertain that, so if you all would
Okay.
like to do that, we would have another meet, like, in actuality, we are willing to meet with you 2-3 times in order to sort out all of the challenges.
If we're making progress, I'm happy to do whatever. I don't want to waste your time. And that's where my question is it conceivable there's a path that we could achieve making people happy? Aside from 35 feet, I mean, if it's 35 feet, then
I think
that's its
Dylan and
own.
I know the prerogative of the HPRC, and I think that we could work with you so that you have a reasonable expectation that they're gonna think that maybe that they would consider that option. If we can find one, and then you're not looking at spending a huge amount of time or money on
Yeah.
developing something.
Historically, were there any breweries?
Did we have
Breweries
it?
or distilleries?
Distilleries.
There's already been
We've
a
had a
distillery,
distillery.
Buck Brothers Distillery was here for a while, but they were bought out.
I was the
How
one
long
down,
ago?
That
That's like
was
on the east end,
recently.
right?
No, I think
No,
in
historic.
historic period, in the historic period.
I don't think there was a distillery. There have been breweries here for a long time.
Historically, Colorado is a fairly poor state from a spirits perspective.
Actually, the big building that's gone was the Opera House. That probably was 50 feet.
And the school. how
Yeah.
high was the school, how tall was the school?
It was massive, it was way big. You can see it on the,
That was probably what, 60 feet?
it was large.
Yeah, that was at the other end of town. And then they
Other
had-
end of downtown.
Does that create a historic precedent?
You're hoping.
I can bring, I will go find pictures of it, we'll superimpose this
No,
on the.
we had another project earlier this year, and they were doing something that was close to the historic use. That's a consideration of the National Park Service, which is sort of at the peak of the pyramid in terms of,
That makes sense.
and we say we follow their guidelines, and that's the number one guideline is, can you keep something in the historic use?
And we're certainly trying, and which is why it's, I think, important for us to be located.
Are you guys aware of any historic distilleries in the region, like up here?
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
Like I said, Colorado traditionally was more, every mine had its own still. Rather
My
than,
granddad used to make whiskey.
there are a lot of
There's a lot of granddads. that
fairly
make it.
confident people
Yeah.
were making whiskey. Yeah, like I guarantee it, and I can show you sites where there is thoughts that whiskey was being made, but it was not done as
On
a
this scale.
as a commercial application in general in Colorado. We
Is it-
do have records of all the distilleries in the state. And I can go back in the 1800s, the IRS actually has really nice data on that, and I can pull and see.
I don't think the map.
But I believe there were only 8 of them in the state.
I don't
in
think
the
the sample
period.
map shows anything.
Is
Well-
it just, do you think there'd be a distinguishing between a brewery and a distillery, or is like
No.
any alcohol production kind of?
I would say alcohol production.
Alcohol production.
We could look at that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I have the data, I can go back
Well,
in and look.
It's a point
agree?
worth bringing up.
There were mills, those were mostly mills. Like if you
Yes,
look at the
all
old
that-
pictures,
Lots and
real
lots
es-
of mills.
yeah, that real estate was mill
We
real
will be
estate.
milling grain.
Put in a restaurant there.
And yeah, and a restaurant as well. You know, I will say, as a mines kid, I know a lot of the miners were wandering down the hill, and happening to have conversations that then led to mines being built. And might have involved heavy drinking. So it was regional, but it generally was on a much smaller scale. And then we'll get into it one way or another.
So I think that would be our suggestion, is talk with Dylan and Jonathan.
Okay.
About, you know, the way to come forward and come back with something that's, if there's ability to come back with something that is on the path closer to yes than no.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your time in working through the
We would
possibilities
much
with
rather
us.
talk to you like this. If it's not possible, we would rather you know now than fight with you in 2 or 3 more meetings, because we don't want to do that.
No,
Charge you unnecessarily.
yeah, and it's not fun for anyone, and that was one of our first, why we reached out to the city initially on this, is we understood we're
We
being
appreciate that.
unorthodox. I just think there's a good reason for it.
I mean, if you guys wanna build a strength, we're here for it, so.
Yeah.
Did you just say that?
It was on the
Yes,
table, so.
One thought, one question. I do like the idea of the 17th Avenue view going east, of the possibility of some mature trees back there, because assuming we go forward with the plans for the moving the pavilion to the east side of the building, the plan is that would be a park. That
Yes.
would be developed, redeveloped as a park area. It has to be done thoughtfully, because there are some not high tension, but there's some
There's also
three-phase
gas.
power lines and natural gas, so, but I think right behind the building there is that possibility. I think that would help the applicant be able to show what it might look like realistically from
Yeah, because this
from
view,
17th Avenue.
this is my least favorite view of everything.
I had to be honest about what it was.
No, I would
and-
rather you be honest, and so I'm being honest in return.
But
Like,
it-
this is
but-
the view where I'm like, oh,
But if I take the trees that are on the left of the building, blocking it completely, and on the right of the building that are taller from a perspective than the building, just fill across, it goes away.
it could, and so then it just becomes, how do you make it look from Creekside? Like, because I think Shannon has a really good point, how does it look from Creekside? So if you look at that as well, what are people that are coming west going to see? You wanna build, an amenity that's down by the creek, how does that look inviting? How does that look like it fits? How does that look like it's part of the historic district? Because that's where you're gonna get the biggest, height.
Certainly.
That's where we're gonna see the biggest visual difference with that height. I don't know, would you guys agree?
Yeah.
Okay,
And to be fair, I believe that's gonna be tough to obscure without buying the rafting company and building something on the
No,
other
no,
side of,
it's-
I mean, we have had conversations of a personal goal of ours is rehabilitating the creek, working with Trout Unlimited and whatnot to try to improve what's
that is a
currently there.
conversation to
But,
have, but
and so that would generally involve trees, but it's not gonna involve 40-foot tall trees like you could do in the park. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we would love to do in general, and if it helps to get to a yes, then that
well,
would
just
be a
that's
great.
like, that's gonna be, I think, from a visual standpoint, that's gonna be in this 17th Street view is a toughie, in my
Okay.
opinion. And then the Creekside view is also a tough one visually,
Okay.
because if we're hearing, I didn't even realize about the Safeway apartments, I just remember the conversation about the health clinic, like that height conversation was really spicy
Fair enough.
It was quite sporty, so,
And we're not looking to be a bad neighbor the day we
no, we
move
don't,
in.
you know, we don't want you to
And
be
so we
a
don't,
bad neighbor.
so we don't wanna get in that situation.
No.
I'd hate to be built and then have people mad at us for existing forever. That's a whole lot of not
No,
fun.
but that's like
People love whiskey.
They do, we do have a solution to most problems.
salted caramel. Oh, did that just come on there? Sorry. Anyway,
You can make a salted caramel.
Yes, yes.
so
I have
I
that
think
too.
we're on the.
And my question is, for the applicant, is that I was a little intrigued to hear about your response to the potential for encountering water, and groundwater and how you're planning to have the flood mitigation there and, you're gonna be below grade, one level, if I understood it right. So you have a parking lot today, so you're gonna be down one level below. If you're going to that expense and there's those efforts for mitigation with the water, is it feasible or even in the, and you still get the height that you want, the total height, to go down one more level?
Yes, and we have had those conversations. Nick hates me every time I bring it up.
And I know there are lots of challenges with that, but I just raised that if that height is important to you for your process, if
Oh, there's a
that's
whole
what-
concept I have on mountain aged whiskey about burying some barrels in the heart of a mountain. I think it would be really cool. There might be a
I
zero.
think it would be expensive.
He does.
I don't doubt that at all, because, we're trying to build a parking structure, we looked at, the possibility of going down, when you go underground, at least with a parking structure, then all other types of codes.
Yeah, and there are some challenges from a fire code perspective. Technically, basements are disallowed for the storage of spirits.
And there could even be water resource issues.
Possibly, but
Yeah,
it sounded like they're already going to some effort to try to mitigate the water issue.
as long as 50% is exposed, it's not legally a basement,
Right,
and therefore we're allowed to store spirits in it. And
But
so
is
we-
it part
we-
of that right now, does it, like, if you look at that apartment that's down below, that apartment is below grade.
It is, and that's what we're looking. We're
Yeah.
not doing additional digging within what's currently there.
But it-
That
Yeah,
apartment.
that apartment is fully below grade.
but it's,
didn't realize
it's sufficiently
behind it.
above the creek though.
Which, and
It
it's
is.
9 feet currently, so we're hoping that one additional foot doesn't turn the world sideways on us. It's still gonna flood every couple of years.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
not
we're
really
gonna, we're
ours,
gonna,
though. That's somebody existing.
and it's not anywhere, that would be terrifying at its current level. I have seen Clear Creek, but it is terrifying and we're not there today.
Okay,
So
I-
thank you very much for
Hopefully
your
that
time.
helps you.
I think you've given a good direction for us to move in. I have no doubt we'll be back at least one more
We
time.
welcome you to come back.
So I appreciate you guys wasting however much time we
No
took of your
waste.
Tuesday night.
No,
So thank you for that.
no waste. No problem. Okay.
Would you like me to lead this, I guess? I mean, you have
No,
the other
we have-
versions?
No, we have the
I
smaller
guess,
version.
I guess a question for staff, if they,
Do you guys want that?
the big plans.
No, I have,
There are differences, and so I'm happy to,
Probably.
that's fine, either way. We'll just take them in the store and write them out again in the future.
Oh, no, don't go anywhere. We have one really quickie other thing for the work session from our commission, not you guys.
So,
Thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you. We appreciate it, guys. So just design guidelines update and discussion of website updates. Have we all been looking at the design guidelines? I'm slowly looking at them, taking notes, and that would be no. That's a no for Patty.
Yeah, there's no one busy. We're gonna talk about it in June, right?
Yeah, June is our
okay.
deadline for the homework.
Good.
I've made a chart, this is a question if you want. Dylan to include in the packet. I made a chart comparing what our guideline topics are and versus what they are in Central City and Georgetown,
Okay.
just to sort of see what
You did
we're,
not just make a whole chart.
I do this all the time for them. That's actually.
I was gonna say, and
work
this surprises you?
It's part
No,
of.
no.
If you know him.
It's part, actually, it's part of the work I do. It's kind of charts.
Can we see it?
Yeah, you can see it. Let me bring it up. But basically, it's a comparison of what do we have guidelines for and what do they have guidelines for.
Oh, like gaps that we're missing
Yeah.
that we could fill in.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that one.
that's great, because we,
Yeah.
And Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but last time we spoke about this, I was told I could get us a few minutes on the 28th.
Yes. Or for me to come speak?
Well, just to kind of discuss with council broadly
Is this in the work session?
for a work session, but
We've had some developments on the work session for the 28th. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. If it's possible to bump that back to the next work session, that would be better.
Are we June, we're the end of June, so if we could get that work session in before our HPRC meeting,
That we could do.
that would be
But
preferable.
we're really jammed with the one with 28th.
Okay, so would you be available June 10th?
Probably.
Okay, put us on your calendar.
and I
I'll look at my calendar.
I went through and did kind of an initial review on my end, like looking at all of the shoulds, for example.
Okay.
And determining what's a should that actually is appropriate, like should, where possible, it says in places, or should generally. It's like, okay, should is probably appropriate, but then, you know, there's so many things that just say should, that could be shall or must or whatever. And I probably highlighted 200 shoulds.
Okay, good. I'm not through all the shoulds.
And then I've gone through and kind of just identified a few things where it's like, oh, we should update the maps here, or we need to update. One big thing that I've started, you know, really briefly looking at is, we talked about that whole purpose item and kind of to say why behind these guidelines. And we have that, but you know, that's something that we can update as well, that you talked about last time.
One of the things that also probably needs to be looked at is we've got several different sets of criteria.
Right.
And it would be nice to consolidate them into one set. In other words, I mean, we, for example, have a list of things that we look at. We also have guidelines, and then we also say comply with the Secretary of Interior standards. So in effect, we have three sets of guidelines, and it would make life easier for staff and probably everybody if we could somehow consolidate that. Because my guess is that the Secretary of Interior standards are not actually being looked at. Because they're not written out there, so they're probably not being checked.
So when I look at them though, my challenge with Secretary of Interior is they say there's a lot of shoulds. And then, so that leaves gray area.
But I do think aligning it where we take their guidelines, convert it to say shalls. You know, as like a baseline, so that we're
Can
considering.
we also look
those-
at height, bless you, height restrictions, because we hear Bojos. We get flogged with Bojos and the height restrictions all the time, and Patty made a good point, she's like, I think the Hatchet building is actually higher.
The Hatchet building, the front facade is taller, Bojo's is taller when you take their like appendages, and things like that, like it's the tallest building when you consider it's like brick, chimney and all of that, but I just pulled up while we were chatting the kind of the view shed, and I do think Hatchet is potentially taller at that very front.
So would that be taller than 35 feet?
It's hard to know
I don't
because
know.
like, we don't have like a really good elevation drawing in that building since they
And
were.
Patty also brought up a good point, you know, if you're looking at this area, that like the Masonic building is 35 feet, but does it sit up higher? So it actually presents as higher than 35 feet? Because if you think about the wall that's just across the street from us, because we do that, like, how do we take that into account too?
Because
The height's basically from, there's a definition in the code, and so that's basically from grade.
From grade, okay.
Yeah, and so obviously that grade, because there's not a building next to it, it would appear, the scale, it would appear higher.
And the thing that I mentioned before about some places do have this thing where, okay, our main street is 2 stories, however, we would consider we would consider the increment of getting to a 3rd floor for, under the following circumstances. And the basic thing was only a few would be allowed total within the district, so that it didn't change the character of the district, so it would still look like it's a 2-story district.
Right.
Well, and I think if we look at something like this request that we just got, I think the only reason that it continues to even be a discussion is because it sits at the end of the historic district. You know, for me, this would not fly in the middle of the historic district. district.
No, it'd be totally out of proportion.
Especially given how small our historic district is really, some
Kinda
historic
overwhelm it.
districts in Denver are 10 times, 20 times the size probably. And so each building and each change that occurs in our historic district, I think, has some level of a
It's a
higher
ripple.
impact
Yeah, it's a ripple
per
effect.
capita or what have you.
Do you know
So
what from grade to the top of I-70 is in that area right there?
I don't, but I can try to get some better estimates of what these heights are,
If
Because,
it's like 40 or 45 feet,
because this drawing right here, like,
yeah, that
that's,
doesn't
Makes it
occur
look
to me
like a
to scale.
that's huge.
Looks like a skyscraper.
Yeah, it does.
Well, and he said that 35 feet is less than what it is to get to the highway. So if that's another 10 feet, then if they knock it down and make it 45 feet, it won't be seen.
And that's the reason I brought up Argo, is if you put this next to Argo, that's the one place that would look
Yeah.
at scale.
right? I do think, if, and it's outside the scope of this discussion, but putting it on Colorado Boulevard on the east end with the potential allowance for 57 feet, you don't need a variance at all.
No,
And it's just an FDP. And then parking is more of a consideration, of course, but
But the FTP still has to be approved in a hearing.
of course, yeah, but I could see it meeting code.
Well-
So anyway,
that is a discussion, I think, for later, like,
Yeah.
we don't have to, I think we have been pretty open.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
So what's the website update?
Well, so we still don't have the website yet.
Wait, didn't we like buy it in December or
Well,
something?
they're still building it, I guess.
Who's they?
The Muni, or it's not Muni Code, it's Civic, Muni Code, Civic Plus. Civic Plus is the name of the website, developer hosting, whatever it is. And so they're like
Did we give him a kick in the pants?
well, John probably has a better update on it, but what we had talked about in the last meeting was once we have that operational, kind of creating kind of specific historic preservation links and like helpful sort of like, if you want to do this sort of project, almost like a really user-friendly flow chart sort of thing to say like,
How to get to yes.
yeah, it's
That was
almost
what we
like a
talked
how to
about
get
last
to
meeting,
yes,
how to get to
got it.
yes.
And so,
And actually, along those lines, it's interesting is Central City has actually included what it is they want
yeah,
within their design guidelines.
Oh, that's one that we're gonna we'll have to look at that then.
Goals, like just,
No, they actually have drawings of buildings. And they say, in this district or sub-district, this is what our expectation is.
That's a really good idea. It's a really, because what we would like to see down there is different than what we would like to see, I think, here. Or even down by, although the school, Carlson is not in the historic district, am I
Right.
correct?
that's correct,
Yeah, it ends at the central hose house,
yeah,
which is like 13th and a half.
right.
Before it has the library.
The library.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the top of the,
Wow, look at
it's
Georgetown.
like 80 lines long.
Oh my God, look at how many we do not have.
I know, Georgetown is very dramatically higher.
That's a case of trying to get similar topics together, that's not gonna work that way.
Can you send this around, Mike?
I'll send it to Dylan.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's right, you can't send
because-
it to all of us. Send it to
Because I
Dylan.
can do.
It's better to sort of always do stuff through Dylan.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a fantastic thing to include in a work session, staff report for council, which will be June 10th.
Yeah, this is a good idea.
To really go into saying, here's where like we've identified that it's maybe room for improvements to add versus like just modify, like what's there now, because it sounds like there's kind of three discrete things we'd like to do this year. It's like modify what's here now to clarify things, make them stronger as needed. Add some things that maybe we're lacking and don't contemplate at all, and then separate to the guidelines maybe, well, with that also combine things as possible, so it's clear.
Yeah, so we don't have three sets of standards.
Right, so that way, even if we have to add criteria, for example, to our code,
Because we have had
We need to figure out a way to sort of consolidating them, so
Right.
it's easier when staff reviews it,
Yeah.
they're not having to go through such a long list of things.
I agree.
And it certainly makes it easier for an applicant as well to say like, you know, instead of saying, look at this, this, and this, and we'll consider all of them, maybe to different degrees, even though we should consider them the same, we can instead say.
And then what Georgetown does, it's just the design guidelines. They're not looking for goals and criteria. They're just saying, they meet with an applicant, and says, okay, it meets this, it doesn't meet that. And they basically,
See, and I
Yeah,
don't
they're
know.
not helpful.
I think though there has to be some flexibility and like, how do we help them get to a yes?
yeah, it can be structured to accomplish
Still,
that.
while still maintaining the guidelines, but how do we help you get to a yes? Because, you know,
Yeah, like what kind of roof can I have? The roof sucks, I need to replace it. What kind of roof would
Yeah.
work for a historic district?
That way they.
Well,
options.
it's the type of thing you can have, certain things saying, these things will get approved. If you want to do something different, that's something that's going to have to go to a hearing.
well, I think also saying these things will not get approved
Yeah.
because one of my concerns that I have, you know, and this pre-application hearing really highlights that is that people come in and yes, it's a historic district, but how do we work around that? And I struggle with that one. As much as I like the idea, I
Right.
struggle with it.
It's about working within the district. not
Yes,
around
working
it.
within the district, not working and getting an exception, because I don't wanna have a lot of buildings that are, well, this is an exception, and that is an exception. I think that degrades the integrity of our historic district.
I think they were finally starting to get that by the end. Who's starting this
Then
again.
one other thing is that there's actually a buffer zone around the district.
Yeah,
Hallelujah,
yeah, you mentioned.
There sort of is one in the architectural guidelines, it talks about that, but it's not super strong.
it's not strong because we can allow for 35 feet, 3 stories outside of the historic district. I would like to tighten that up and put the buffer zone around.
Yeah, that's a good point, because, you know, if I was a developer, I'd say, well, I found this great commercial parcel that's just outside the historic district, but still gets all the benefits of being directly next to it, and then you
Yes.
have a lot fewer restrictions, but it still has an impact on the.
Yeah, I would like to
historic
see a buffer, and I don't think we have to go north, I mean, south. I think we have to go that 3 blocks, maybe 4 blocks north of the historic district, like on the other side of the alley. Because that's where I see it's going to be challenging.
You could talk about the residential historic districts over there and have the engagement with that community, because there was a recommendation for that district, but it would be a process, like a pretty big community process.
I would like the process because, I mean, you guys all know this, I'm a big believer that this whole town could be a local historic district, and it could be several local historic districts, like East End has different architectural needs and periods of significance than West End. You know, and they don't have to be, like, I am a big believer in how do we build small, local historic districts that meet the needs of that 5 or 6 blocks. Does that make our life probably more difficult? Yes. But does it also mean that maybe we don't have all along Colorado, 35, 40-foot buildings, you know, that right now go right through planning and come right to council because there's nothing stopping it. It's not anything illegal. It's not against code. The Gem Hotel is a perfect example. They were not breaking any code. They were not like, they followed code. Do I like the idea? I do not. I think that 3 stories is too tall for right there. But it doesn't matter what I think because it doesn't go against code. So I think if we can buffer our historic district, but that's just my opinion. I mean, you guys may not think that buffering historic district is a good idea. I'm totally.
That was part of my objection that it's like this big skyscraper right on the edge and that would look weird. So I like the idea of a buffer.
What many places do in both Central City and Georgetown have done this, is they have actually combined their architectural standards with the design guidelines. A lot of communities have done that. The one problem is when you do that, overall, I think that's a good idea. The problem is what gets lost is the historic guidelines have to be treated separately because there's less room to vary from what those are. And unfortunately, when people combine it, they sort of forget there's certain ones there, you can't overlook them.
No, and I actually would not want to combine them because I really feel very strongly that one of the reasons that we're working on tightening our design guidelines is that there is a lot of interest coming into our historic district that doesn't necessarily fully appreciate or want to comply with all the historic district stuff. And I think it is our responsibility to make sure that compliance does happen. Because we don't have a big historic district. It's a finite resource, in my opinion. I don't want to see our historic district chopped up in little exceptions here and there. And that is a trend that I see. And I could be wrong.
No, I'd agree.
You know, I think it's important, so I think if we make our guidelines a little tighter, and if we have a thing on the website that's a clear, here's how you get to yes, but here's what we won't do.
Right.
Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, this is not gonna happen. So that people don't invest time and money and fight and whatever. I don't know, what do you guys think?
No, I think that's a good idea. One place where I wrote a code is actually the first page was, what do you want to do?
Oh, that's good
And
too.
it basically, so you go down and it just has a list of, here are the things that people most often ask to do. And so it says, okay, if you want to do this, then go to this section.
I think that would be really good. That narrows it down. What?
Build in a hyperlink.
Yeah, build in a hyperlink. You know, because I don't mind having these meetings, but I hate to have to be like, no, sorry.
Right. Well, I do think that a conversation like that, given that we're about to update these, does kind of help frame maybe the updates as well, because I do think a lot of the COAs we've approved recently, we discovered some of the limitations of what we have now.
Well, I think the last COA that we did outside of the minor, this building, I think that was a great COA because it had very specific conditions, you know, that did highlight some of our maybe gaps.
Right.
That I think also protect our historic district. So my suggestion, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I would like to see as much information initially to help people figure out, can they do what they want to do? And if they think they can, here's how you're going to get to yes, here's what will give you no.
Right.
You guys think?
Yeah.
Well, we noticed that too in one of our last meetings that people were looking for, tell us what you think we should do. And okay, here's the projects that will work.
Yeah, right, because, you know, especially once you get to this point, like, we're not design consultants or project managers, but if we have things that can help people say, like, we kind of assess these things and these are appropriate things and these are inappropriate things, then
That's a good word.
people don't have to
What's
ask.
more appropriate, what is not.
Yeah, hard and fast rules.
And actually, that's the way that the broader set of the Secretary of Interior is they basically give you, here's examples of things that are appropriate.
Right.
And then next to it are, here's examples of things that are inappropriate.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you had an applicant come in who had looked at some of those like bulletins that are several hundred pages long, it's pretty clear, it just takes a lot of.
Yeah, but you really have
Investment
to
of
dig through some of them,
Right.
like to,
Yeah, it's true.
I think one of our responsibilities is to make it easier for people to figure out if this is worth their time.
Yeah, and there's another set of documents called the interpretations.
Well, I haven't seen those.
Actually, it's surprising how few people know about the interpretations, but what they were is there were things that when people applied for tax credits, they were written up by that section of the Park Service and said why or why not was this application approved for tax credits.
Oh, that's would be
And
really
so,
helpful.
and then each one of them identifies which were the, which of the standards were involved. And there's a lot of interesting things that come out of that. One of which is that the idea is that there may be a best solution, but there might be other solutions that are okay to do.
And I think actually a best and then an okay is not a bad thing to have for a historic district, because I just had this conversation with somebody. I was like, look, if you buy in the historic district, this is not, you build whatever you want and all you have to do is follow building codes. Like, you're in a you're in an agreement with the city as the representative of the, state, local, and federal historic preservation, like, and they're like, wow, I'm like, no, that's the deal, that's the deal. And the person that I was talking to, the real estate agent, didn't disclose to them that their building was a nationally registered building.
What? Is
No.
that legally something that they're
Listen,
supposed to do?
When
Or
we were
no?
looking at houses here, they
I don't know
didn't
how.
disclose they were meth houses, so, you know,
So no.
like,
Okay.
yes, should they have disclosed it? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But they
Huh.
didn't, this person told me that they did not know until after, they went to go do some work, that this was actually a national building on the National Register, and they had to go for Hprc, and other stuff. And they were fine with that, but they were just like, this was not,
Never disclosed.
it was not disclosed.
Could this be the kind of document that we distribute to realtors, say, hey,
Well, I think you also
Put 'em
put
in a
up,
place.
you also put up signs at each end that says this is a national historic district.
that's a good way to do it too.
Well, that goes along with our wayposts, our guidepost wayposts that the city needs to do, like that might be something from a city standpoint. Did that give you enough guidance for what you're looking
So
for?
I can put together, I think, a pretty comprehensive memo for council that will then also be instructive for our next meeting.
Okay,
This would be the week after the 10th.
yes, and that is, read your guidelines, bring your suggestions, send your suggestions to
Yeah, it'll
someone.
be the
So the
18th of
18th?
June
18.
Okay.
is what we will be for, and I don't know that we'll have necessarily any COA planned for that, but we can just do a work session.
If we don't,
These guys will probably be back though.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I don't know how long they'll need to reconfigure everything. I think we'll probably reach out and talk to them later this week or next week, hopefully, and then
well, they do
See how
seem like they're
quickly they-
fairly, neck deep in planning, like
Mm-hmm.
it's fairly serious planning.
yeah,
So probably this week,
yeah.
I would if that was me. Anything else you need from us?
I don't think so, unless you have anything else you'd like to.
No, I
That's
think this
on
was a
me.
great meeting. I actually really like these pre-application meetings. I think they make things a lot easier.
Yeah.
Okay, then I,
Interested to see that they had already shortened at some point, there's a little note here that they had shortened the building.
I think originally it was closer to 75.
and where are you thinking that's one's gonna go 40 feet over our